Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about the first two episodes of Star Trek Discovery, titled The Vulcan Hello and Battle of the Binary Stars, respectively. It was kind of tentative, as a lot of people were, to check these out, and I finally saw them both back to back, and I gotta say, unapologetically, I enjoyed the hell out of them. If you can get beyond what your preconceptions of Star Trek are meant to be for the time period within which this is taking place, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. One of the things that stood out to me immediately was the rapport, the familiarity with these characters interacting with each other. Once the captain and the first officer, Michael Burnham, are beamed back aboard the Shenzhou, it felt very much Star Trek. There was an explorative quality. There was this sort of tongue-in-cheek rapport with some of the dialogue delivery. And I'll be completely honest, the first thing that came to my mind was it felt kind of akin to what we saw on the bridge between the characters in the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage, which is what this is going to be mostly compared to, because that's the time frame it's supposed to be taking place in. And I really loved it. I believed these characters had been together for a while. I believed they were all dominant in the posts they were meant to fill aboard the Shenzhou and everything. And it felt like Starfleet. It felt like Star Trek. And I enjoyed the hell out of it. If you can get beyond sort of your preconceptions of what everything is supposed to look like in this time and place, I really think you'll enjoy what's there on the screen. I thought it was really highly engaging and enjoyable. I found it actually somewhat intriguing too, because of course another thing this will be heavily compared to is the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek film and the subsequent films in that franchise. Because things look that much further advanced than they're supposed to in, the TOS era and whatever like that, or in this case, 10 years prior to that. And there were certain things, certain elements that were somewhat evocative, I thought, of the 2009 Trek, from mirroring the USS Kelvin's finding an anomaly in space and then being led to Nero's Romulan ship at the start of the 2009 series. Very similarly, do we have the Shenzhou, they're basically trying to repair like a communications buoy, and they find an anomaly in the binary, asteroid field around the binary stars, and this leads them to the Klingon vessel. And toward the end, whereas in the movie you had Kirk and Spock having to go aboard Nero's Romulan ship to rescue Captain Pike, in a similar vein you have Captain Georgiou and Michael Burnham going over to the Klingon vessel toward the end of this two-parter to hopefully take into custody the Klingon who's really spearheaded this entire penultimate Cold War that's going to be happening between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and that is this Klingon by the name of T'Kuvma. And I found, I know that's another thing a lot of people are from the get-go have had a problem with. The sort of aesthetic redesign of the makeup for the Klingons and everything. And what won me over, completely bolt-faced honestly here, like, to not even question it, was the fact that they were speaking Klingon and it was subtitled, with the exception of a couple lines of dialogue that were translated to English. The entire time they're speaking Klingon. And, there's this kind of familiarity with the Klingon culture that Trekkies and Trekkers have built up over the decades that I like. They've kind of rewound it back to square one, where the Klingons are very alien. We haven't, in the timeline of the episode, in the dialogue they suggest, we haven't actually encountered the Klingons for over 100 years. They're going to look different to us. They're going to look, strange and alien and to a lot of, the humans and other alien species making up the Federation that are aboard these Starfleet vessels. It's going to seem gobsmacking, and I like that I had that sort of estimation of them. it challenged my preconceptions as to what Klingons should look like, the way they should act. And the fact that this particular spearheading Klingon, T'Kuvma, he has this messiah complex. He believes he's Kahless reborn, and he's doing this. I love that all that Klingon mythology is wrapped around all of this, around what he's trying to do in creating a war, go on the attack against the Federation. He considers that phrase, "we come in peace," to be a declaration of bloodshed and war and all these things. And I don't know why he feels that way exactly, but even going to the effect of calling all of the 24 houses, Klingon houses, that make up, I guess, the High Council or whatever, and seeing all of those Klingons looking still very similar to T'Kuvma and all of the Klingons that are a part of his house, aboard his vessel, it seems like, the aesthetic redesign goes beyond just what the speculations were before the series, that maybe this was an ancient cast of Klingons and they wouldn't all look like that. But I don't have that big of an issue with it, because surely, there's room for those other casts of Klingons, those other, whether it be warrior caste or whatever, with the long flowing locks and such like that, the armor, the more militaristic armor. I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But I loved, again, that it encapsulated those aspects of the Klingon mythology that I was familiar with, Kahless. And here is this Klingon who feels like, his cause is something benefited by Kahless, like a vision of Kahless. And he feels that he is Kahless reborn and all these things. It's insanity, but at the same time, it's highly compelling. And the way, his ship is open to all Klingons, outcasts, and the like. There's the one albino Klingon whose name I think was Voke. And this guy, insanely, I was reminded of Mr. Joshua from Lethal Weapon, who has the lighter flame under his arm, and he has to keep it there to show his being tried and true to the villain's cause in the film. And here comes this Klingon Vogue, and he puts his hand in the flame and proves himself to T'Kuvma that he's righteous to his cause. And so it was like, whoa, man. The Klingons were something fierce to be dealt with, as unfortunately our Federation heroes found out in this particular episode, this two-part prologue, as I say. And one thing I will say, I mean, the actors, the casting all around was spectacular. I love Sonequa Martin Green's Michael Burnham. I mean, she is a very sexy lady, if you don't mind my saying, and she's a strong individual. But then there are so many layers that go back into her background that we see, where she was taken as Sarek's ward. Now, Sarek, that's another aspect of this that's probably going to be questionable to Trekkies and Trekkers. I'm still kind of on the fence as to how I feel about Sarek and his relationship to Michael Burnham. But I do think it was interesting that she's a human being who was raised, for all intents and purposes, in a Vulcan surrounding. And so in the second episode, when we flash back to the first meeting between she and Captain Philippa Georgiou, you see just how sort of a fish out of water she is. She has to find her human bearings again. And so that it's caked in irony that she would then mutiny, as we see through the course of the story, because of her strong beliefs that the Klingons are there to enact war, to engage in a war. And she, in talking to Sarek and the idea of firing upon the Klingons first, being that these are kind of Klingons we haven't encountered before, I don't know if the same rationale would have worked. If we had fired upon them first, they would take that as respectful. That would probably just prove their point, or T'Kuvma's point in any case, that, the Federation Starfleet. And I love that when he's outlining what that is representative of, he mentions the Tellarites and the Andorians and humanity and all that kind of stuff, and Vulcans. And because those are the founding members of the Federation, and, we got to see a little bit of that building up to that point in Star Trek Enterprise, which is my second all-time favorite series after the original series, back here. So I just, it was highly compelling, that the idea that, she's gonna be willing to risk her career for the hopeful saving of lives aboard her ship, most notably the life of her captain, Michelle Yeoh, as Captain Philippa Georgiou, and as a fan of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, of course, I loved seeing, Michelle Yeoh in that role. But I will say, I don't know what video it was where I was talking about Star Trek Discovery and building up to its eventual airing. I did speculate and pseudo predict that the captain would not make it out of this sort of pilot episode. I assumed it would be a pilot episode, but they broke it up into two, the first two episodes of Star Trek Discovery proper as a prologue. And sadly, that proved to be true. Now, what I did not expect was that Takuma himself would actually be killed off as well. He makes the killing blow against Captain Georgiou, and subsequently Michael Burnham shoots him and kills him. And it was just really palpable to me. I was really thoroughly engaged with it. Even though I had predicted it and I'd kind of seen it coming, by that point in the story when it actually happens, it blindsided me. I had completely forgotten that speculation, and I thought, oh, maybe she's going to make it out. Maybe she's going to make it out of this two-part prologue alive, and she'll just be, on another ship somewhere. No, unfortunately not, in the case of Georgiou. Getting back to the cast, Doug Jones as Saru, I really loved his tentative nature, the apprehension he had, and learning about why that was with his species. They had been dominated over and enslaved to a degree, and they were bred for perceiving the coming of death, and he was feeling that very strongly going up against the Klingon vessel. He wanted to tuck tail and run like it was nobody's business. And I probably, if I were there, I probably would have agreed. I probably would have been like, let's go, get out of here. Let the rest of the fleet come and deal with it, which they subsequently did. I love that we got to see the rest of the fleet and everything like that. And which brings me back to the idea of the technology looking so much further advanced than what it's supposed to in the TOS era this is supposed to take place in. But I have been given articles and read things that suggested this will all be explained at some point. And this coincides with something I saw Jonathan Frakes, I believe it was, who has directed one or two of the episodes, formerly being Commander Riker of Star Trek The Next Generation. He let slip or something like that the mirror universe would actually be an aspect of Discovery. And so I had put forth the speculation, and we'll have to wait and see as the series continues, that perhaps if we go back to the Star Trek Enterprise two-parter in Season 4, In a Mirror Darkly, Parts 1 and 2, in the Mirror Universe, we didn't see a crossover of the characters of the Enterprise era going into the Mirror Universe. It was strictly a Mirror Universe-based two-part episode with the characters, their doppelgangers in the Mirror Universe. And one of the things they were fighting over was the USS Defiant from the TOS era had tripped back after the Tholian web, where we first saw it. It was, sucked into a interspatial vortex, and had tripped over into the Mirror Universe back in time in the Enterprise era. So I had put forth the speculation, if there was some way for Starfleet or the Federation or one of their vessels to have encountered the Mirror Universe before it was first encountered in TOS, in the original episode Mirror Mirror, this could account for why the technology has been that much further advanced. If they had somehow been able to get samples of the technology of the Defiant, which would have been around hundreds of years before, or 100 years at least before where they were in the timeline, if they got a sample of that technology or data on that technology, it stands to reason there's room enough for them to have, sort of made that backwards compatible. And so the all of Starfleet would have been that much further advanced, almost aligning with the Next Generation level, if not slightly beyond it, depending on the leaps and bounds technologically they would take with science and the construction of these spacefaring vehicles. And I'm really, I'm really curious to know what the explanation will be. One of the Star Trek fiction authors I greatly admire, David Mack, was quoted as saying in an article that this will be something that is explained. There will be an in-story explanation for it. Time will tell what that explanation is, but I put forth the idea that the mirror universe component could be an aspect of that, and we'll see. But like overall, I'm looking at notes that I wrote just to make sure I could cover everything that I really wanted to say. Another thing I loved that I have in my notes is after Michael Burnham has been put in the brig for being mutinous, Vulcan nerve pinching the captain, knocking her out, and then trying to train all the phasers and photon torpedoes on the Klingon vessel against the captain's wishes. After she's in the brig, there's a point where after they've come under the attack of the Klingon ship and all the other Klingon ships have warped in, there's the one guy who's injured on the bridge, and he's supposed to go to sickbay, but he stops off at the brig because he's trying to implore Michael Burnham, you're supposed to be on the bridge. You need to be in command. What the hell's going on? And there's this line of dialogue that was tried and true Star Trek that actually gave me goosebumps. Not so much for what follows, which was a shock, but he says something along the lines of, we're explorers. Why are we fighting? We're not soldiers. We're out to explore and to understand. And then he's subsequently blown out into space. It wasn't that he was blown out into space, which was poignant. Again, something sort of harkening back to a sequence from 2009 Star Trek. There was, a female Starfleet member walking through a hallway and then got blown out into space or something like that. But just that line of dialogue. It was acknowledging what the core of Star Trek is meant to be. And whether we like it or not, part of Gene's vision, there were times of war, there were times of battle, there were times of bloodshed in the history of Star Trek, in the history of the Federation, and building up to the Federation, and whatever like that. There was the Romulan War, there were wars with the Klingons. We weren't always chummy with the Klingons like we would end up being by the end of DS9. So I love that there was that acknowledgement that we're supposed to be explorers, new worlds, new discoveries, trying to, bring that message across, the message of humanity, of unity in the Federation, but also trying to understand new cultures and all that kind of stuff. I mean, just that one line of dialogue was there to remind us that that is the mission statement, but at the same time, with the surrounding battle that was ensuing, sometimes humanity has to step up and fight back, and that's just the way it happened. Looking back over my notes, I think that's pretty much everything, that I really wanted to say. The one final footnote was, being that I loved so much of what we got in this first 2-episode prologue to Star Trek Discovery proper, it's kind of a kick to the chops then that it's all laid waste by the end. I really love the rapport between the captain and the first officer. I really love the rapport of Saru and, just the familiarity between those characters. I like that Saru, apparently, in the preview for what's coming this season on Discovery, we see that he's apparently aboard Discovery, and he's kind of tentative around Michael Burnham. She's gotten this, reputation, I guess, for her mutinous action, and they kind of blame her for whatever oncoming war they're going to be surrounded by and engaged in, that kind of thing. And the only sort of complaint I had, mild though it may be, it's more borderlining a nitpick, was toward the end when she's actually set before the court-martial squad, or whatever you want to call it. It kind of took on a very Kryptonian air, in a sense, like a Kryptonian tribunal where they're all surrounded in shadow and you can't really make them out, and the light is pointedly on Michael Burnham, and I just felt like it was overemphasized that we don't want you to know who these people are. They're not who matters. Well, the fact that I'm just seeing black silhouettes makes me wonder who they are. And you know, kind of takes the focus away from what I'm supposed to be focused upon, which is Michael Burnham and what she's saying. I'm hearing what she's saying. You know, she feels remorseful. She understands her mistake, and she understands her world, her carpet that represents her world was ripped out from under her. But it was like too on the nose. Like, you know, don't pay attention to these three people court martialing our heroine. You know, that was the only thing that really rubbed me the wrong way in the entirety of this two-part prologue, as I keep referring to it. This you know, sort of pilot. Um, Again, I thought the background of Michael Burnham was very intriguing. Her growing up on Vulcan, being the ward of Sarek. Again, I'm still a little on the fence about how I feel about Sarek being involved in this story so closely knit to one of its main characters. I don't really have a problem with the fact that this makes Michael Burnham sort of a stepsister to Spock. I mean, it took forever and a day, you know, Star Trek V so many years later before we found out about Cybok, his half brother. So, you know, I don't mind that he's got other family. It was just more so a matter of Sarek himself. I'm just not sure if I'm that comfortable with his being involved in this, but time will tell. Maybe he'll grow on me. And again, just one last look over my notes. I think I pretty much covered everything I wanted to say about it. Bottom line about this two-part prologue for Star Trek Discovery, again, A Vulcan Hello and Battle at the Binary Stars, is gangbusters. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, looking at the preview for what's to come later on in the season, I'm a little tentative about. Some imagery I liked, some imagery I didn't like, and I'll have to see it in context if I am so able to watch it further. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of the first two episodes of Star Trek Discovery, if you happen to see them as well. You know, what you thought of them, love them, hate them, anything goes in the comments below. Keep it clean, keep it neat, keep it respectful. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. As long as we have a great conversation, that's what this is all about, the topic of talk. And I'll catch y'all later. Peace.